The Atlanta Hawks didn't just get eliminated tonight, they were processed. There are playoff losses, and there are bad playoff losses. There are games where the shots don't fall, the whistle feels wrong, the opponent gets hot, and by the end, you can still talk yourself into dignity. This was not that. This was an elimination game where the season walked into the room, sat down, and the Knicks immediately started filing out paperwork. By halftime, New York led 83-36. That's not just a bad half. That's reported as the largest halftime lead in NBA playoff history. So this is the NBA's Atlanta Hawks postmortem. The question isn't just why the Hawks lost. The question is how a 46-win team, a real playoff team, a team with real pieces and a real regular season, ended up leaving this kind of final image behind. Because that's the cruelty of postseason basketball. It can't preserve the whole year. It preserves the last thing that people saw. And the last thing people saw from the Atlanta Hawks wasn't a team going down swinging. It was a team getting taken apart in public. So let's start with the body. This was Game 6. The Knicks came in up 3-2. Atlanta's at home. The Hawks weren't being asked to do something impossible. They were being asked to protect their season for 48 minutes and send the series back to New York. Instead, the game was basically over before the second half could even have a purpose. The Knicks didn't win this by finding one late matchup, and they didn't win it because Jalen Brunson hit 3 impossible shots in the last 2 minutes. They won it because they came into Atlanta with playoff certainty, and the Hawks answered with fog. OG Anunoby came out like a man who had no interest in Game 7. Karl Anthony Towns gave New York size, pressure, and control. Brunson didn't have to drag the game uphill because the Knicks already had Atlanta sliding backwards. Mikal Bridges, Josh Hart, Mitchell Robinson. This looked like a team that knew exactly what the assignment was. As for the Hawks, this wasn't a roster without talent, and that's what makes the autopsy uglier. If a bad team looks bad, that's fine. We don't really need an investigation. That's just paperwork. But the Hawks weren't an accidental playoff team. They won 46 games. They had a legitimate regular season, players worth believing in, and reasons to think this version of Atlanta basketball was starting to make sense. Then they reached the game that would decide whether the season lived, and they had nothing organized left to say. But before we bury them, we have to be honest about the season. The Hawks didn't have a worthless year. Jalen Johnson became the center of the good version of this team. He wasn't just a nice young player anymore. He became a real offensive hub, a rebounder, a connector, a matchup problem. The player who made Atlanta feel like it had a future bigger than one guard, creating every possession. Nickeil or Alexander Walker mattered. He wasn't just background noise. He gave them shooting, scoring, defense, and a level of two-way competence that made the Hawks more stable than they might have been otherwise. Dyson Daniels mattered too. Size, defense, disruption, pressure on the ball, passing lanes. The kind of player who gives a team shape even when he's not the first name in the box score. Onyeka Okongwu continued to be a real piece. Maybe not a superstar, maybe not the answer to every front court question, but he was a useful, physical, modern big who can be part of winning basketball. CJ McCollum gave them veteran structure, shot creation, and someone who had seen playoff possessions before. Zachary Rissache is still part of the future. A young wing shouldn't be judged by one ugly autopsy photo. And the team itself did things well. Atlanta moved the ball. This was one of the best passing teams in the league. That's not nothing. That means there was a real offensive idea in here. There's actual design. There's a version of the Hawks that's connected, unselfish, and hard to guard. And that's why this ending feels grotesque, because this wasn't a failed 82-game season. This was a good regular season that ended in the most humiliating way possible. So what were the symptoms? First, half-court fragility. The regular season lets you build rhythm. It lets you run. It lets you stack good habits against teams that are tired, injured, traveling, experimenting, or just trying to survive through February. The playoffs remove comfort. The Knicks didn't just guard Atlanta. They made Atlanta think. They made every possession heavy. And once the Hawks had to manufacture clean playoff offense against a set defense, the machine started to cough. Jalen Johnson can be a cornerstone and still not be ready to carry an entire playoff identity through a defense that's loaded up on him. Nickeil Alexander-Walker can have a great regular season and still find that playoff shots arrive with less oxygen. C.J. McCollum can calm possessions and still not raise the ceiling enough. Dyson Daniels can defend and disrupt and still not solve the scoring problem. Okongwu can be useful and still get swallowed by a more physical, more certain team. Okay, second, physicality. New York looked like the grown-up team, and I'm not saying Atlanta's soft, but there's a difference between being athletic and being forceful. There's a difference between having good players and having players who know how to impose the terms of a playoff game. And the Knicks imposed their terms. Atlanta negotiated with the scoreboard and lost. The third symptom was emotional leakage. The scuffle with Dyson Daniels and Mitchell Robinson didn't kill the Hawks. Let's be clear about that. The Hawks were already in the ground by then, but it did tell you what kind of night this had become. When you're down that badly in an elimination game, frustration starts looking for a body. That moment wasn't the cause of death. It was the death rattle. So here's the ruling. The Atlanta Hawks died of acute septic shock. One bad possession infected the next one. One missed rotation infected the next coverage. One Knicks run infected the entire building. And by halftime, the organs were shutting down, and the second half was just paperwork. Secondary cause, half-court offensive failure. Contributing factors, New York's physicality, playoff pressure, and a total inability to slow the game down once it started getting away. Manner of death was public disassembly. This wasn't about one missed shot or one bad matchup. This wasn't really even about one bad half. Although, my God, what a bad half. This was about a team reaching the moment where its identity had to become solid, and instead it turned into smoke. The Hawks had talent, a regular season structure, and a future, but tonight asked a different question. Can you survive when the opponent knows your second option, your third option, your pressure points, your escape routes? Can you survive when the whistle doesn't save you and when the crowd's nervous? When the opponent gets the first punch and the second punch and then realizes you're not punching back? Tonight the answer is no. The death was not that Atlanta lacked talent. It was that none of that talent could organize the room once the room started catching fire. Now, the false hope wasn't irrational. Sometimes a team lies to itself. Sometimes the record's fake, the numbers are fake, the style's fake, and the playoffs reveal what should have been obvious in January. And I don't think that's what happened here. The Hawks were allowed to believe. They're allowed to believe in Jalen Johnson, Alexander Walker's leap, that McCollum could stabilize the offense, that Rissache was part of a larger runway, and that Daniels and Okongwu could give them a defensive backbone. They're allowed to believe a 46-win team means something, and it did mean something. It just didn't mean they were ready for this. Atlanta didn't imagine the progress. That was real. But progress isn't the same thing as proof. The regular season said the Hawks were moving in the right direction, and the playoffs asked whether that direction could hold under pressure. Game 6 answered with a number so ugly, you almost want to turn away. So what survives? Jalen Johnson survives. Not untouched, not above criticism, but he survives. He's still the most important part of what Atlanta's trying to become. This series should sting him. It should annoy him all summer, but it shouldn't erase the player he became. Nickeil Alexander-Walker survives. A bad ending doesn't cancel a breakout. It complicates it. The next question is whether this version of him is a regular season story or a playoff piece. But the player's real. Dyson Daniels survives. He needs the right offensive ecosystem, but players who defend, disrupt, and think the game usually survives autopsies better than score-first players who don't do much else. Okongwu survives, not as a magic solution, but as a real NBA big on a real team with real use. Zachary Rissache survives because young wings are supposed to have ugly nights before they become finished products. C.J. McCollum survives differently. He's not the future of this thing, but he was part of the bridge. He helped Atlanta be more coherent than it might have been otherwise. And sometimes that matters, even if the bridge collapses before you get all the way across. The larger question survives too. What are the Hawks actually building? Are they building around Jalen Johnson as the central player? Are they building a long, defensive, multi-possession team with Daniels, Johnson, Risache, Okongwu, and Alexander Walker? Are they trying to stay respectable with veterans while the younger core catches up? Because Game 6 didn't say, blow it all up. So the Hawks don't need to panic. They need clarity. The official ruling, the 2025-26 Atlanta Hawks died of acute septic shock, brought on by half-court failure, New York's physicality, and a complete loss of composure in the defining game of their season. Time of death was halftime, maybe earlier. Honestly, the paperwork probably started somewhere in the first quarter. By the second half, everyone was just waiting for the signature. And the Hawks were better than this game. And that's the fairest thing you can say, and maybe the most damning. They built a real season. They gave Atlanta reasons to watch. This team was not a joke. But playoff endings are cruel because they don't care about context. They don't care about your November. They care about ball movement, growth, promising pieces, better nights, or the version of the team that fans think maybe something was starting. The ending gets the final image. And Atlanta's final image wasn't noble or cinematic or a team falling one possession short. It was a team standing in the middle of its own season while the Knicks took it apart piece by piece. So yeah, the Hawks had a season worth respecting. They also had an ending worth investigating. And tonight, that investigation wasn't kind. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.